Captain Olin set both hands flat on the map and looked at Brauer across the operations center with an expression that occupied the specific space between dismissal and courtesy. Not quite either, but leaning toward the former. "Staff Sergeant," he said, "fire support coordination is why you're in this element. Pattern analysis is what I have an S-2 for." He turned back to the map. "Leave it there." Nobody in the room said anything. 16 days later, Staff Sergeant Nora Brauer called in a precision airstrike at 117 meters from the lead element of a patrol on a hillside in Kunar Province, authorized a weapon whose minimum safe distance under Joint Fire's Doctrine was listed at 230 meters, and brought every soldier in that patrol home without a scratch. The operations center was quiet when she said it, and quiet for a long time after. Brauer had been a JTAC, a Joint Terminal Attack Controller, the soldier responsible for calling in close air support, for 4 years, which was long enough to have developed both the technical proficiency and the institutional patience the job required. The technical proficiency came from aptitude and from work. The institutional patience came from something harder to name. She had grown up in Billings, Montana, the daughter of a wildland firefighter and a high school physics teacher. Her father had taught her to read terrain the way other fathers teach their daughters to ride a bike, early, repetitively, and with the expectation that she would eventually stop needing to think about it. Her mother had taught her that numbers were not abstractions, they were descriptions of what was actually happening. The difference between the two perspectives had shaped the way Brauer moved through the world. Always looking at the ground, always converting what she saw into something measurable. She had enlisted at 19 and spent her first 2 years as a conventional infantry support soldier, before a battalion fires officer noticed, during a training exercise, that she had corrected a grid coordinate error his entire staff had missed. He pulled her aside after the exercise and asked if she had considered JTAC school. She told him she had been waiting for someone to ask. She qualified on her first attempt. She had done 3 deployments since then. She was 29 years old, and she had authorized more than 60 live CS missions, and she had never once called in steel at a range that the Doctrine said was wrong. She had thought about what that meant. She had a habit of thinking about things precisely, and for longer than most people expected. The Doctrine existed for reasons. The safety distances existed because of what happened when they were violated. She understood that the rules were written in the outcomes of bad decisions, and she had enormous respect for the accumulated institutional knowledge embedded in a minimum safe distance. She also understood that Doctrine was written for average conditions. Terrain, cover, weapon accuracy, target geometry, these were variables, and when variables shifted far enough from the mean, the threshold could shift with them. That was not her opinion. That was physics, and she had been doing the physics for 16 days. Captain Olin had arrived in Kunar 3 weeks before Brauer's assessment. He was efficient, she would give him that. His briefings were organized, his decisions were timely, and he managed upward with the practiced ease of someone who had been paying close attention to how rank gets earned. He was also, she noticed quickly, a man who had arrived with a clear picture of what each person in his element was for, and who did not particularly welcome information that complicated that picture. She was for putting steel on target when authorized. She was not for reading enemy movement signatures that the S-2 had classified as ambient activity. She had presented her assessment on the 16th day after Olin's arrival. Her analysis of a movement pattern in the mountain, approaches northeast of Checkpoint 7, that she believed indicated an enemy crew-served weapon being moved into a position that would command the primary patrol route. She had brought the data. She had laid out the pattern in specific terms, the intervals, the locations, the elevation changes consistent with something heavy being repositioned incrementally over a week and a half. Olin had listened until she finished. Then he had said what he said and turned back to the map, and that had been that. Sergeant First Class Jerome Paxton had been standing near the back of the room. He was 43 years old, with 22 years in the Army and the particular stillness of a man who has decided that most things in the world are not worth the energy of surprise. He had 1 tour in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, and an expression that functioned as a kind of social weather report. Other soldiers glanced at him before deciding how to respond to something. He looked at the closed door of the operations center after Olin left. Then he looked at Brauer. He said, "He's not a bad officer." She said, I know. He just doesn't know where to put it when something doesn't fit the shape he expects. She looked at him, the assessment or me. Paxton's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted slightly in the direction of acknowledgement. Why don't you give me the data, he said. I want to look at the pattern myself. She handed it to him. He looked at it for a long time, then he handed it back and said, be ready. She had always been ready. Being ready was not the question. The question was whether ready would be enough when the moment came, and whether the moment would come at all, or whether she had spent 16 days running calculations on a threat that was going to materialize somewhere else entirely, and leave her with nothing but a private record of being right in a room where she had not been permitted to be right out loud. Private First Class Tomas Vela, who was 22 and from Albuquerque, and who had an endearing habit of asking questions that other soldiers were too self-conscious to ask, found her at the Fire Support Coordination Cell 3 days after the briefing. She was working through calculations on her notepad. He looked at the numbers for a moment, then looked at her. Is that the terrain analysis for the Checkpoint 7 approach? He said. She looked up. How do you know about that? I'm a rifleman, he said. My job is to walk point on that route. She looked at him. He was not being sarcastic. He was being, in his particular way, completely direct about the fact that what she was calculating had direct personal relevance to him. Sit down, she said. She explained it the way her mother had taught her to explain anything. With the numbers first, then what the numbers meant, then why they mattered. The enemy element was using the ridgeline above the 3rd switchback as a staging area. The intervals between observed positions suggested a crew-served weapon, probably a DSHK heavy machine gun, being moved into a prepared position with a direct line of sight to the route below. If she was right, the next patrol through that section would be walking into a fixed enemy position with a field of fire that covered the entire exposed portion of the trail. Vela was quiet for a moment. Then he said, does Captain Olin know? He knows my assessment, she said. Does he believe it? She set down her pen. He believes the S-2 summary that calls it ambient activity. And you don't. I believe the math. Vela looked at her for another moment. Then he said, what happens if the math is right and we walk into that position? She told him what would happen. She did not soften it. He was a soldier who was going to walk point on that route, and he deserved an honest answer. After she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, what are you doing to get ready? She picked her pen back up. The terrain feature at grid 664. There's a granite formation at the bend in the trail. If a patrol gets pinned in that section, and the DSHK is in the position I've projected, there's a way to put a GBU-38 on target without hitting friendlies. But only if the patrol has reached that formation, and only if the delivery parameters are exact. How exact? Exactly exact. He looked at the numbers on her notepad. Is that within Doctrine? The Doctrine says 230 meters for troops in the open, she said. That formation is solid granite, 8 feet thick. It changes the effective blast overpressure threshold considerably. How considerably? I've been running it for 2 weeks, she said, 117 meters. Vela stared at her. He did not say anything for several seconds. Then he said, have you told Captain Olin? I've told him the threat assessment, she said. If it comes to the other part, I'll be there. She met his eyes. That's why I'm with your element. He nodded slowly. Then he stood up. At the edge of the coordination cell, he stopped and turned back. Sergeant Brauer, he said, I'm going to trust you. She said, show me by staying behind that rock formation if I tell you to. He said, yes, Sergeant, and he walked out, and she went back to the numbers. The night before the patrol, Brauer sat in the comms room and ran through the 9-line cast brief in her head for the last time. Not because she needed to. Because the act of doing it had the quality of something she could still control in a situation where most things were already set in motion. She thought about the calculation, the 117 meters, the granite formation at the bend, the blast overpressure curve through hard terrain versus open terrain, the time of flight, 23 seconds from ordnance release at altitude, 23 seconds during which everything she had worked out on paper would either hold or it wouldn't. She thought about Olin saying, leave the intelligence work to the S-2. She had filed it in the same place she filed everything, carefully, without editorializing, in the quiet mental space where information waited until it was necessary. She had understood for a long time that people like Olin were not exceptional. They were ordinary. They looked at shapes they had been taught to expect and struggled to process the ones that didn't fit. She had spent her entire career being a shape that didn't fit, and she had made her peace with it the same way she made peace with everything, by running the math until the answer was clear, and then being prepared to act on it, whether or not anyone else had caught up. She was not angry at Olin. She had been, briefly, after the briefing. But anger was expensive, and she spent it only where it bought something, and spending it on a man who wasn't in the room wouldn't buy anything at all. She checked her radio, she checked her crypto, she verified her link to the aircraft holding overhead in its orbit. She set the notepad with her calculations on top of her gear, where she could reach it in the dark. Then she sat in the quiet of the comms room and thought about her father. He had spent 30 years reading fire behavior from the air. How wind and terrain and moisture combined to produce something that looked random and wasn't. He had told her once that the fires that killed people were never the ones nobody saw coming. They were the ones somebody saw coming and couldn't get anyone to listen to. She had thought about that for a long time. She picked up her radio handset, verified the frequency, set it back down. She went to get ready for the morning. The patrol moved out at 0510 in the darkness that precedes high-altitude dawn by about 40 minutes. The sky not yet lightening, the air cold in the thin, specific way of mountain mornings in Kunar, carrying a silence that had always struck Brauer as deceptive. Not quiet because nothing was there. Quiet because whatever was there had not moved yet. She was third in the file, behind Olin's RTO and ahead of Vela. Paxton held the rear. She had Hammer 3-1, the A-10 assigned to their fire support package, checked in on station before the patrol reached the first switchback. The pilot's voice was crisp on the radio, fuel state good, weapons loaded, the particular economy of someone who had done this enough times to not need extra words. She had told Vela before they stepped off, "If I say the word granite on any net, you get to that rock formation. You don't ask why. You go." He had said yes. The first switchback passed without incident. The second, the trail narrowed at the third switchback where the rock formation jutted from the hillside and the route became briefly exposed. 60 meters of open ground before cover resumed. Brauer had been watching the ridgeline above it since they rounded the second bend. She was watching it still when the DSHK opened up. The sound was specific and unmistakable. The heavy cyclic thump of a crew-served weapon that is not a rifle and is not a machine gun, but something between the two, something that removes options from the people on the wrong end of it. The first burst walked across the trail ahead of Olin's RTO, and everyone went to ground simultaneously, without orders, because the body knows before the mind does what that sound means. She was already on the radio. Hammer 3-1, this is JTAC Brauer. Troops in contact, grid November Victor 446772. Enemy crew-served weapon, ridgeline northwest, initiating CAS. The pilot's voice came back immediately. Copy JTAC, Hammer 3-1 ready to copy 9 line. She gave it. She had been ready to give it for 16 days. Olin's voice came on the patrol net. Brauer, I need a sitrep. Sir, I have Hammer 3-1 ready, requesting clearance for danger close. A pause. What's your distance? She looked at where the patrol had gone to ground. Vela and 2 other soldiers were at the granite formation, exactly where she had needed them. The others were in a shallow depression 20 meters short of it. Close enough. It would have to be close enough. 117 meters, she said. The silence on the net had a specific quality. She had heard silences like that before. The silence of someone who has been handed a number and cannot make it fit anything they know. Brauer, Olin said, Doctrine minimum is 230. Sir, the terrain at this position changes the effective threshold. I've run the blast overpressure calculation for this exact grid. Friendlies at the granite formation are within protection parameters at 117 meters. Another burst from the DSHK. The depression where the other soldiers were pinned was not safe for much longer. The math was right. She had run it 16 days straight, and it was right. Olin said, that's your call to make. It was. That was the doctrine he had apparently decided to remember. The JTAC makes the call. The JTAC owns it. This is Staff Sergeant Nora Brauer, she said on the CAS frequency clearly with her full name because Doctrine required it and because she had spent 16 days making sure that when this moment came, The record would know who was speaking. I am calling danger close. Distance to friendlies 117 meters. I own this call. Hammer 3-1, cleared hot. The pilot's voice came back. JTAC confirming danger close, 117 meters, you own the call. I am rolling in. She pressed her back against the rock and looked at where Vela was across the formation. He was watching her. She gave him one signal, stay. He stayed. She counted. 23 seconds. At altitude, she could not see the aircraft. She could hear the engine note change as it rolled in on the target. She could hear the DHK still firing. She could hear soldiers she was responsible for staying alive. She could feel the granite of the rock against her back, and she could feel the calculation she had run for 16 days existing in her body now, not as numbers on a notepad, but as something more physical. The held breath of math that is either right or it isn't, and which has no interest whatsoever in how many people believed it. 1, 2. She did not close her eyes. 23 seconds is not a long time in any ordinary context. On a mountain in Kunar Province with a crew-served weapon firing and soldiers in the open and a 500-pound precision munition inbound to a point 117 meters from the nearest friendly position, 23 seconds is a geography you have to live inside one heartbeat at a time. The impact was not what she expected, and it was also exactly what she expected. The ground moved in a way that ground is not supposed to move. And then the sound reached them a fraction of a second after. The heavy concussive compression of a weapon, doing exactly what it had been designed to do, in exactly the place it had been directed. The rock she was leaning against transferred the shockwave through her spine, and she exhaled without deciding to, and then she was back on the radio before the dust had reached them. Hammer 3-1, assess effects. JTAC, target destroyed, enemy crew serve position neutralized, no observed movement. She keyed the patrol net. This is Brauer, threat neutralized. All elements account for personnel. The silence after a moment like that is different from ordinary silence. She had come to understand that specific quality, the silence of people who were alive and knew they were alive, in a way that becomes indistinguishable from surprise for the first several seconds. Paxton's voice came on the net. All elements accounted for, no casualties. Vela came around the edge of the granite formation. He looked at her. His face had the expression she had seen on soldiers in the immediate aftermath of something they had been told was impossible and had watched happen anyway. He did not say anything. She went back to her radio. The after-action report was filed by Olin at 21:30 that evening. Paxton told her about it the following morning. In the brief, clipped way, he conveyed information. When the information carried an implication, he wanted her to register. He references the JTAC element 11 times, Paxton said. Your name appears once, at the end, in the equipment section. She absorbed this. She looked at the wall of the coordination cell. She thought about the lines she had spoken on the CAS frequency. This is Staff Sergeant Nora Brauer. I am calling danger close. I own this call. A line that existed in the radio transcript, logged with a timestamp, because every transmission on a live CAS mission was automatically recorded and archived. Major Chandra will read the transcript, she said. It was not a question. She already did, Paxton said. She found 11 references to the JTAC element, your name once, and then she pulled the audio. The conversation between Major Adiezi Chandra and Captain Olin was relayed to Brauer through Specialist Irina Soto, who had been in the operations center and had the careful memory of someone who understood that certain conversations were going to matter later. Chandra had set the transcript and the report side by side on the table. She had looked at Olin for a long moment before she said anything. Then, Captain, that audio file contains the words, "This is Staff Sergeant Nora Brauer. I own this call." That soldier took personal, legal, and professional responsibility for authorizing danger close ordnance at 117 meters. She said her name out loud because Doctrine requires it. And you wrote her report with her name in the equipment section. Olin had not answered immediately. Chandra said, when a soldier owns a call like that, her name goes in the report. That is not a recommendation. That is a correction. She rewrote it herself. The amended report went to battalion by 0800. Lieutenant Colonel Owen Kirby read both versions. Then he read the radio transcript. Then he set everything down and sat for a moment. He had been in the Army for 28 years. He had seen CAS coordination at every level from forward observer to fires planner. He was familiar with the concept of danger close and with the reality that the minimum safe distance published in Doctrine was an average, not an absolute, a number built for average conditions to be modified by informed judgment in the field. He had seen informed judgment in 28 years. He had also seen something else, less common, the kind of calculation that required not just competence, but the specific willingness to stake your name on math that nobody else had run, in a situation where being wrong and being dead were the same outcome. 117 meters, friendly casualty, zero threat, neutralized. And a pattern analysis submitted 16 days earlier that had predicted the exact threat, the exact position, and the exact parameters Brauer had subsequently used to plan her response. An analysis that the official S-2 summary had classified as ambient activity. He called for Brauer, Paxton, and Olin. The meeting lasted 34 minutes. Kirby had Brauer walk him through the entire sequence. The original pattern analysis, the 16-day preparation, the calculation, the call. She gave him the math the same way she gave everything. Directly, completely without embellishment or apology. When she finished, he said, "The amended report will stand as the permanent record, your name, your rank, your call, your analysis." He looked at her steadily. "The intelligence assessment from 16 days ago is also going into the record. You were right, and you were right before anyone else in this chain had the same read. That belongs in the documentation." He recommended her for the Army Commendation Medal with Valor. The paperwork went to brigade that week. Olin found her in the coordination cell 2 days later. He stood in the doorway with the particular expression of a man who has spent 48 hours in an extended conversation with himself and has arrived, at some cost, at an honest position. "Staff Sergeant Brauer," he said. He used her name and her rank, and she noticed the difference, because she had been paying close enough attention to know what the difference cost him. "The original report was wrong," he said. "Not incomplete, wrong. What you did on that hillside required something the report I wrote didn't reflect." He paused. "I also submitted a supplemental to the brigade recommendation describing the pattern analysis, the 16 days of work that made the call possible." He looked at her directly. "That was yours. All of it was yours, and I wanted it on the record." She looked at him. She thought about what she could say, the list of true things she had accumulated over 3 weeks of being called an element instead of a name. She thought about Paxton saying, "He doesn't know where to put it." She thought about 16 days of running calculations alone in the coordination cell while the official summary said ambient activity. "Don't do it again," she said, "to me or anyone else." He said, "No, Sergeant, I won't." She believed him. Not completely, not yet, but enough. She called her father that evening from the MWR phone. He picked up on the second ring. She told him what had happened the way she told him everything, directly, with the numbers first. 117 meters, 16 days, 23 seconds, 0 friendly casualties. He was quiet while she talked. When she finished, the silence on the line had the quality she associated with her father, processing information he had been waiting for, without letting himself acknowledge he was waiting. "You ran the blast overpressure calculation for the granite formation?" he said. 16 days worth, she said. Another silence. Then, in the particular voice he used when something had exceeded even his expectations, "That's good math, Nora." "Thanks, Dad." He did not say anything else for a moment. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the slow, deliberate breathing of a man who has been carrying something for a long time, and is choosing, carefully, how to set it down. "Come home safe," he said. "I will." She called her mother after. Her mother listened without interrupting, and then said, with the precision of a woman who had spent 30 years teaching physics, "So the published minimum safe distance doesn't account for terrain variables. It accounts for average terrain. And you calculated the variance." "Yes." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "The manual is a starting point," she said. "The physics is the actual answer." "That's what I told them." Her mother said, "Good." Then more quietly, "I'm proud of you, the kind of proud that doesn't really fit in a phone call." Brauer sat with that for a long time after she hung up. The formal recognition came 6 weeks later, during a battalion formation at the forward operating base. She stood at attention while Kirby read the citation, her name, her rank, her call, the distance, the outcome, out loud in front of 230 soldiers, in the particular clarity of a morning in Kunar Province. and for the first time in the sequence of events that had begun 16 days before a patrol she had tried to prevent had walked into a threat she had predicted, the record said what it needed to say, permanently, in her name. Years later, she was sitting at a table in an apartment in Fayetteville when a number she didn't recognize called her phone. She almost let it go to voicemail. She answered. The voice on the other end was young and deliberate and slightly rehearsed, in the way of someone who has prepared for a conversation and is trying not to let the preparation show. Is this Sergeant Brauer, the JTAC from Kunar 2011? Staff Sergeant Brauer, she said. Who's asking? My name is Castillo, Specialist Yara Castillo. I'm in JTAC school at Hurlburt Field. I found the amended report and the supplemental analysis. Someone posted the declassified version in a study group. A pause. I read it 6 times. Brauer was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window. Outside, it was an ordinary Tuesday in October in North Carolina. On the shelf above the television, there was a small frame her father had built, the citation in full, her name at the top, every line of the record that had once been written without her in it. What do you want to know? Brauer said. The 117-meter call, Castillo said. How did you know the calculation was right? In the moment. When you cleared the aircraft to roll in, how did you know? Brauer thought about that. 23 seconds. The granite at her back. Vela's face across the formation. 16 days of numbers that had been right before anyone else had run them. I didn't know, she said. I did the math, knowing comes after. Before, you just do the math and you trust it. And if someone's already told you the math is wrong, or not your job to run, then you run it anyway, Brauer said. And you be ready when it matters, because the situation isn't going to wait for permission. A long pause on the line then. Can you walk me through the blast overpressure calculation? The terrain variable piece? Brauer pulled a notepad toward her. Start from the beginning, she said. Don't skip the physics. The call doesn't happen without the physics, and the physics is the part most people want to get past. Don't get past it. Live in it until it becomes automatic. Then, when everything is on fire and you have 23 seconds and Doctrine says you're wrong, you won't be thinking. You'll just know. Yes, Sergeant. Good, Brauer said, and she started talking.